I wish you had never given birth to me." Chloe didn't whisper it. She screamed it loud enough for everyone at the restaurant in Naperville to hear. For a terrifying second, the clinking of forks stopped. Conversations dissolved. Even the waiter carrying wine glasses froze. I looked at Chloe. She was 34, wearing the emerald green dress I helped her pick out. Sitting beside her was Mason, his arm draped across her chair, staring at me with a quiet smirk. I slowly folded my napkin and laid it beside my slice of birthday cake. Then I stood up. "If that is truly how you feel," I said quietly, "then live as if I never did." Nobody moved. I picked up my purse, walked through the dining room, and stepped out into the crisp June evening air. The keys to my silver sedan were in my palm. I unlocked the door, climbed inside, and drove away. Less than 3 minutes later, my phone buzzed. "Bring my car back or I'm calling the cops." I glanced at the text at a red light, silenced the screen, and never answered. People ask if that was the exact moment everything changed. The truth is, everything had been changing for years. I just refused to look at the math. My name is Eleanor Vance. I am 58, a widow, and until that dinner, I would have sworn I had a wonderful family. Not perfect, but we loved each other. As it turned out, I was the only one calculating this based on love. For nearly 30 years, my life was defined by numbers. I spent my career as the director of supply chain operations for a major retail chain across the Midwest. I managed inventory, predicted shortages, and balanced ledgers. Numbers never lied. People, on the other hand, did not make sense. My husband, Arthur, passed away 6 years ago after a short fight with esophageal cancer. We shared 35 years together. After Arthur died, Chloe became my entire world. I told myself she still needed me, or maybe I desperately needed to feel needed. By the time she married Mason, I had helped pay off her entire student loan debt. When they struggled to purchase a home, after my granddaughter Lily was born, I stepped in with cash. When Chloe's old sedan broke down in a winter snowstorm with Lily shivering in the back seat, I bought her a brand new SUV. When I handed her the keys, she sobbed. "I'll pay you back, Mom." And I smiled. "There will be plenty of time for that later." Funny how those words haunt you. There never was any time left. The birthday dinner started like a dream. Chloe organized a gathering of 12 people. Mason's parents were there, along with close friends and sweet little Lily, who spent the first hour coloring on the children's menu next to me. When I handed Chloe a box containing pearl earrings, she whispered, "I love them, Mom." And I believed every syllable. Then the mood shifted. Mason leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "So, Eleanor," Mason grinned, "have you decided which one of us gets the vacation home by Lake Geneva someday? Might as well sort out the legal paperwork now." A few relatives chuckled. I smiled silently and sipped my water. Mason shrugged. "I'm just being practical. Estate planning is smart." Chloe laughed softly. "So true, Mom. You've always preached about being prepared." I changed the subject, asking Lily about her school art project. But 20 minutes later, Mason leaned in again, swirling his wine. "You know," Mason said, lowering his voice, "if you helped us refinance the mortgage, right now we'd save enough to finally remodel the kitchen." Chloe nodded eagerly. "It would make our lives so much easier, Mom." I looked across the table, my tone gentle. "I've already helped out quite a bit with finances over the past few years, Chloe." Mason's smile faltered into a sharp edge. "Family helps family, Eleanor. What's one more signature?" I looked straight into his eyes. "No." I didn't yell. I simply said no. Mason leaned back, the mask dropping. Chloe stared at me, flushing crimson. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean exactly that," I replied calmly. Chloe crossed her arms defensively. "We would never ask unless we desperately needed it." "I know," I said softly. "Permanently bailing people out isn't helping them grow." Mason let out a cynical laugh. "There it is. The control freak." I blinked. "Excuse me?" Mason shook his head. "Everything with her always comes with strings attached." I turned to my daughter. "Chloe, you know I have never asked for anything in return." Before Chloe could speak, Mason cut in. "Except your total gratitude and financial submission." The entire table felt deathly silent. Chloe pushed her chair back, her hands shaking. "You know what?" Chloe's voice cracked. "I'm tired of this, Mom. I'm tired of feeling like you get to dictate how we live just because you hold the purse strings." People at surrounding tables shifted uncomfortably. Mason didn't say another word. Chloe looked straight into my eyes, delivering a blow that shattered my universe. "I wish you had never given birth to me." Not a single soul breathed. Not even little Lily, whose wide eyes were filled with absolute terror. That is the image that burned into my soul. Not Chloe's cruel words, but Lily's terrified eyes. That was when I stood up, spoke my single sentence, and walked away into the dark Chicago night. Sitting alone in my car 20 minutes later, the silence was deafening. That was when the tears finally came. Not because my daughter insulted me, but because I realized she actually believed every word she screamed. Had I spent years teaching my own daughter that my love always cost me everything, while costing her absolutely nothing, I sat in the dark living room of my Chicago home all night long. The house was dead quiet, the kind of silence that feels heavy, like wet wool pressing against your chest. I didn't turn on a single lamp. I just sat on the edge of the sofa, staring at the glowing screen of my phone as I scrolled endlessly through my photo albums. As I walked into the kitchen to make coffee, I reached automatically for 2 mugs. One for me, one for Arthur. My hand stopped halfway to the cabinet before I let out a tired laugh. Arthur had been gone for 6 years, and somehow my hands still remembered a life my heart couldn't let go of. I walked back to the living room and kept scrolling. Years of memories flashed past my thumb. First birthdays, school graduations, family dinners, Christmases by the fireplace. But as I looked closer past the smiling faces and the warm lighting, a cold, sickening realization settled in. People often talk about toxic parents who ruin kids by being too harsh. But nobody ever talks about the other kind of destruction. The kind caused by someone who gave too much, never said no, and built the cage with their own hands. I still remembered when Lily was 5 years old. We were standing in my sunlit kitchen, her little hands covered in flour as I patiently taught her how to bake shortbread cookies. The door swung open, and Chloe walked in looking frazzled, checking her watch before sighing. "Mom, could you just watch her this weekend too?" She dropped her bag and left without waiting for an answer. I never said no, convincing myself I was just being a devoted mother and grandmother. But looking at the screen now, I saw the truth. I hadn't raised an independent woman. Without realizing it, I had built an entitlement machine, and I had handed Mason the blueprint on a silver platter. And then my phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was a notification from a messaging app, a direct text from a contact saved as my sweet Lily. My heart gave a sharp, painful jolt. I unlocked the screen immediately. But before my eyes could fully focus on the text bubble, a second notification popped up right underneath it. This message was deleted. Too late. I had already seen the words flash across the screen for a split second. "Grandma, I miss you so much." She had typed it out, hidden away in her room, and then panicked and unsent it. My hand started to tremble as I held the phone. I knew what happened. Lily was only 7 years old. A 7-year-old child doesn't unsend a message to her grandmother out of nowhere unless someone is standing right over her shoulder, whispering poison into her ear. Someone telling her that calling me or missing me is a betrayal. That was when the deepest, most agonizing wave of guilt washed over me. I remembered comments from strangers on family drama channels warning me months ago. When you enable an adult child, you aren't just spoiling them. You are laying down a red carpet for a parasite to walk right into your life. I used to scoff at those words. I thought my family was different. Now, sitting alone in the dark, I saw how blind I had been. It wasn't just Chloe anymore. Mason had weaponized my granddaughter. He had been using that sweet, innocent 7-year-old girl as an emotional hostage for months. Whenever they needed money, whenever Mason wanted to squeeze another favor out of me, Lily was the emotional leverage. And worse than that, they were whispering into my granddaughter's ears, teaching her to look at me not as the grandmother who adored her, but as a stubborn, selfish old woman who withheld things from her family. The hardest truth to swallow wasn't even the fact that my daughter had screamed those hateful words at me in front of a crowded restaurant. The brutal, unforgivable truth was that my financial safety net had become a shield so comfortable, so blinding, that Chloe couldn't even see what Mason was doing right beside her. She was completely, utterly blind to how her husband was systematically using her as a tool to pry open my bank accounts, my real estate, and my retirement savings. Mason didn't marry Chloe because he loved her. He married her because her mother was a retired corporate executive with a lifetime of savings and a soft spot that never healed after her husband died. I set the phone face down on the table. The first rays of pale morning light began to creep through the living room blinds, cutting long, sharp shadows across the floor. My eyes burned from lack of sleep, but my mind was clearer than it had ever been. For 30 years, my career had taught me one fundamental rule of supply chain management. If a system is fundamentally broken at its core, pouring more resources into it won't fix it. It will only accelerate the collapse. I had spent my entire life balancing ledgers, predicting shortages, and managing risks for millions of dollars of corporate inventory. Yet when it came to my own flesh and blood, I had completely failed to manage the most dangerous risk of all, a predator hiding inside my own family, fed and fattened by my own misplaced generosity. The sun came up over Chicago, bright and unyielding. My phone remained silent. No apologies from Chloe. No remorse from Mason. Just the echoing silence of a relationship built on transactions rather than truth. I picked up my coffee mug, walked over to the kitchen counter, and opened my laptop. It was time to look at a very different kind of math. It was time to audit my own life and cut off the supply chain for good. By 9 o'clock that morning, I wasn't sitting at home waiting for an apology that was never going to come. I was sitting in a leather armchair across from Victoria Hastings. Victoria had been my corporate lawyer for over 20 years. She was a sharp, silver-haired woman who wore tailored blazers and drank her black coffee like it was liquid strategy. 6 years ago, right after Arthur passed away, Victoria was the one who helped me structure the Vance Family Trust. She knew every single brick, title, and dollar tied to my name. She closed the heavy manila folder on her desk and looked straight at me over her reading glasses. "Eleanor," Victoria said, her voice steady and calm. Let's get one thing crystal clear before we talk about anything else. The house Chloe and Mason are living in right now. They do not own it. For a second, I wasn't thinking about legal documents. I was thinking about Arthur telling me years ago. One day Chloe will thank you for protecting her, even if she doesn't understand it now. I frowned, leaning forward. Wait, what do you mean? When they bought it 7 years ago, I gave them the cash for the down payment and helped them move in. Everyone in the family assumed it was theirs. Victoria let out a dry, knowing chuckle. They assumed a lot of things. But you might remember why we structured it the way we did back then. Mason had a terrible credit rating, drowning in personal debt. If you had handed them the deed outright, the bank would have slapped a lien on it immediately. So, acting on your instructions to protect your daughter, I set up the Vance Family Trust. Legally speaking, Eleanor, you are the sole trustee and owner. You never transferred absolute title to either of them. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I remembered that day 7 years ago. Mason had smiled, shaken my hand, and called me a lifesaver. Back then, I thought I was being a smart, protective mother. Victoria leaned back, her expression turning serious. Which brings us to why you're sitting in my office today. Because someone tried to break through that legal wall a few months ago. My breath caught in my throat. What are you talking about? 2 months ago, Victoria continued, tapping a finger against the folder. My office received an automated notification. An inquiry was made regarding a home equity loan application on that exact property. Someone tried to tap into the home's equity line for $200,000. $200,000? I gasped, my hands gripping the armrests. Who authorized that? Chloe wouldn't even know how to file paperwork like that. She didn't, Victoria said flatly. The application was submitted under a digital signature attempting to bypass trust protocols. But because the property is locked inside the Vance Family Trust, our system blocked it immediately. The bank rejected the loan because the applicant did not hold individual title. Victoria paused, letting her words sink deep into the quiet room. I launched a private inquiry after that, she added. The IP address and paperwork traced straight back to a commercial loan broker downtown, and the primary contact managing the application, Mason Brooks. The air left the room. My heart stopped beating for a second. All the pieces of the puzzle slammed together with terrifying clarity. It wasn't the money that made my stomach turn. It was realizing he had planned the entire birthday dinner weeks in advance. The birthday dinner at the restaurant in Naperville wasn't just a random family blow-up. It was a planned, targeted attack. Mason was completely out of money. His personal debts had finally caught up with him, and his attempt to loot my real estate behind our backs had failed miserably because of the trust. He needed money, and he needed it yesterday. The only way left to get his hands on my assets was to pressure me into signing away my legal protections right there at the dinner table in front of 12 witnesses while manipulating Chloe into acting as his emotional battering ram. When I said no at that restaurant, I wasn't just rejecting a request for a kitchen remodel. I was cutting off a desperate, cornered con artist who was trying to steal my life's work. They didn't invite me to celebrate my birthday, I whispered, the words tasting like ash on my tongue. They invited me to execute a financial ambush. Victoria nodded slowly. Exactly. He used your daughter as a shield, and he used your love for your granddaughter as leverage. And now that you've said no, they know the walls are closing in. I sat there in silence, feeling the last remnants of my naive maternal guilt burn away into pure, cold clarity. For years, I had managed global supply chains, navigated corporate hostile takeovers, and balanced multi-million-dollar ledgers. I knew how predators operated in the business world. I just never expected one to share my dinner table. I looked across the desk at my lawyer. The confusion and heartbreak from the night before were entirely gone, replaced by something much sharper. "Victoria," I said, my voice as steady as steel, "let's review the trust documents. I want a complete audit of every single asset, and right now. I want to revoke all occupancy privileges for anyone who isn't my granddaughter." 2 days after my visit to Victoria's office, the heavy weight in my chest hadn't lifted. I sat at my kitchen island with a cup of black coffee when my phone rang. The screen flashed an unknown number. Local area code, no caller ID. I hesitated, then pressed accept. "Hello?" I asked, my voice tight. For a few seconds, there was only static and heavy breathing. Then, a small, trembling voice whispered through the speaker. "Grandma, is that really you?" My heart shattered into a million sharp pieces. "Lily?" I breathed out, tears stinging my eyes. "Sweetheart, are you okay? Where are you calling from?" She was whispering, her words breaking with soft sobs. "I'm calling from Daddy's old iPad in the hallway closet. Mommy and Daddy are downstairs arguing in the kitchen. Mommy was crying, and Daddy said you were a selfish old woman who ruined everything. But I don't care about that, Grandma. I just miss feeding the sparrows with you in the backyard." Before I could answer, a loud crash echoed through the line, followed by a harsh man's voice shouting in the background, "Give me that." Then the line went dead. Dial tone. I dropped the phone onto the kitchen counter. My hands shook so hard I could barely wrap my fingers around my mug. I sat in the driver's seat for several minutes without turning the key. My thumb hovered over Chloe's name in my contacts. I almost called. Almost begged her to come home. Then I remembered Lily's frightened little whisper, and I lowered the phone. For 48 hours, I had debated whether to give them another chance, whether to smooth things over just to keep peace for my granddaughter's sake. But hearing that 7-year-old child crying in a hallway closet, terrified of her own home because toxic adults were poisoning her mind, erased every ounce of hesitation left in my soul. If I stayed silent, if I let them keep using my kindness as a weapon against my own blood, Lily wouldn't just lose her grandmother. She would grow up believing manipulation, cruelty, and greed were normal parts of love. I grabbed my keys, walked out the front door, and drove straight back downtown to Victoria Hastings' office. There was no room for emotional hesitation anymore. We needed to handle this the exact way corporate America handles a hostile breach. Cleanly, legally, and with absolute finality. Victoria handed me a freshly printed set of legal documents. "I was expecting you back, Eleanor," Victoria said calmly. "Well, what's our move?" "We don't negotiate with con artists," I replied, my voice steady. "Execute the formal notice." Within 24 hours, the legal machinery moved into gear. Victoria's office dispatched a formal notice to quit directly to the property on Maple Street. Because the house was legally owned by the Vance Family Trust, and because Mason's unauthorized attempt to tap into the home equity line constituted a direct breach of occupancy terms, the notice gave them a strict deadline of 30 days to vacate. At the same time, we initiated formal recovery protocols for every piece of personal property inside and outside that house purchased with my individual funds, from the high-end designer living room furniture and custom appliances to the electronics I had bought with my own credit cards. 3 days later, the neighborhood on Maple Street got quite a show. At 8 o'clock in the morning, a large moving truck pulled right up to the driveway. 2 professional movers stepped out, clipboard in hand, ready to clear out every item listed in the personal asset inventory. Within minutes, the front door flew open. Mason stormed onto the porch, his face purple with fury, veins bulging at his temples. He shouted, demanding to know what the movers thought they were doing. When the movers handed him the legal manifest signed by Victoria, Mason whipped out his phone and dialed 911, screaming that a robbery was taking place. 15 minutes later, a county police cruiser pulled up behind the moving truck, its red and blue lights flashing against the morning sun. A tall officer stepped out and walked up the driveway. Mason immediately rushed over, pointing aggressively at the moving truck. "Officer, thank God!" Mason yelled, playing the frantic victim. "These people are breaking into my house. They're stealing my furniture in broad daylight. Arrest them!" The officer listened calmly, then raised a hand to pause Mason's rant. He walked over to the lead mover, checked the paperwork, and then walked back over to Mason and Chloe. "Mr. Brooks," the officer said flatly, "you own nothing here. The property and everything inside it belong to the trust and Ms. Vance. Clear the way and let them work." Mason's jaw dropped. "Are you out of your mind? I live here. This is a civil dispute. You can't just let them gut my house." "This is a legally enforced trust recovery," the officer replied evenly. "Take it up with your legal counsel." Mason stood frozen on the porch, his face twisting between humiliation and blinding rage, while Chloe stood behind him in absolute silence, staring at the ground as neighbors peered out from behind their curtains. I wasn't there to watch it unfold. I sat miles away in my quiet kitchen, staring at the small wooden chair by the corner where Lily used to sit and draw. I closed my eyes and whispered a silent prayer for her safety. Then I took a sip of my coffee, knowing the supply chain of entitlement had finally been shut down for good. 3 days after the moving truck cleared out their living room, a formal mediation notice arrived. The session was scheduled for a neutral legal mediation center downtown in Chicago, overseen by a court-appointed mediator. When I walked into the conference room with Victoria, Mason was already seated at the mahogany table. He wore a sharp, expensive charcoal suit, leaning back in his chair with an arrogant, unbothered smirk plastered across his face. He looked like a man who believed he still held all the cards. Chloe walked in right behind him, her eyes swollen, dark circles carved deep beneath them, looking hollow, exhausted, and broken. She wouldn't even look in my direction. Victoria didn't waste any time with small talk. She calmly opened 2 thick manila folders and slid them across the table. "Before we discuss any property settlements or timeline agreements," Victoria said, her voice cutting through the heavy silence of the room, "let's make sure everyone has complete visibility over the actual financial realities of this marriage." On the left side of the table lay the comprehensive legal documents detailing the Vance family trust, alongside the digital paper trail and IP logs proving Mason's unauthorized attempt to secure a loan. On the right side lay a separate dossier, complete statements from downtown casino player clubs, luxury credit card applications opened under hidden aliases, and forensic financial audit reports. Mason glanced at the documents, his confident smirk instantly faltering. The color drained from his face. "What is this trash?" Mason snapped, slamming his palm against the table and jumping to his feet. His voice echoed off the glass walls. More fabricated lies from a bitter, controlling mother-in-law who thinks she can dictate everyone's life. "You set this up. You engineered the whole thing to destroy our family." He pointed a shaking finger directly at me, his face turning beet red with panic, disguised as fury. Before Victoria could even open her mouth to respond, something shifted across the table. Chloe stood up. It wasn't a slow, hesitant movement. She stood straight, her hands trembling uncontrollably as she picked up a thick manila envelope from the right side of the dossier, the one containing the casino statements and secret credit line records. She didn't look at me. She turned her tear-filled, horrified eyes straight toward her husband. "Chloe, sit down. Don't look at that," Mason stammered. his bravado instantly evaporating into pure desperation as she opened the envelope. She pulled out page after page of casino loss statements and secret debt notices, throwing them across the table. Suddenly, I remembered every argument I'd had with my mother. Every time Mason told me she was controlling. Every time I believed him instead of the woman who had never once abandoned me. I remembered every single time I defended him. And every time I accused my own mother instead. You told me my mother was the one suffocating us, Chloe choked out, her voice cracking as fresh tears spilled over her cheeks. You told me she was keeping us in chains, that she was the reason we were drowning in bills. But look at these dates, Mason. Look at where the money went while I was sitting at home raising our daughter. Mason stared down at the papers, completely paralyzed. River North Casino, Chloe read aloud, her voice shaking with profound betrayal. Opening secret lines of credit behind my back, using my social security number while I trusted you completely. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles turning pure white. You told me she was hiding wealth from us, but you were the one selling out me and our daughter to fund your secret gambling addiction. The silence that followed was absolute. Mason sank slowly back down into his leather chair, the fight completely draining out of him. His shoulders slumped, his jaw went slack, and the arrogant corporate mask he had worn for years shattered into dust. He looked small, pathetic, and utterly cornered. His own legal counsel, a slick downtown attorney who had looked entirely confident walking into the room, slowly pushed his glasses up his nose, looked at the casino statements, and then leaned over to whisper urgently into Mason's ear. "Mr. Brooks," his lawyer said quietly after a brief, tense exchange. "Given these liabilities and the fraudulent mortgage filings, I strongly advise that we accept the opposing counsel's settlement terms immediately." Mason didn't look up. He stared blankly at the polished mahogany table, his lips moving silently without words. The mediation concluded less than 20 minutes later. The final legal agreement was drafted, printed, and signed right there on the spot. Mason was legally required to agree to an immediate, uncontested divorce, surrender all claims to any family assets, and vacate the Maple Street property within 14 days. In exchange, the legal team agreed to withhold immediate criminal referral for financial fraud, allowing him just enough rope to walk away before the authorities stepped in. When Chloe walked out of that conference room, she didn't look back at Mason. She stopped by the doorway, her eyes meeting mine for the first time in months. She didn't say words of forgiveness. Some chasms are too wide to bridge with a single sentence, but in her tear-stained eyes, the fog of manipulation had finally cleared. As I stepped out into the crisp afternoon air of downtown Chicago, the weight that had pressed against my soul for years was finally gone. The supply chain of deception was severed. The accounts were balanced. And for the first time in a very long time, the future belonged to truth. 10 months have passed since that mediation room in Chicago. The dust has settled, the legal papers are filed away, and the storm has finally broken. On a quiet Friday morning in late April, I drove up to Noblesville, Indiana. Right by the river, tucked away under the shade of ancient oak trees, sits a small, quiet coffee shop with chipped green window frames. Years ago, long before Mason ever walked into our lives and cast his shadow over everything, Chloe and I used to come here every single weekend. We would sit by the water, share a cinnamon roll, and talk about nothing and everything. It was our sanctuary, untainted by greed or manipulation. When I stepped inside, the familiar scent of roasted espresso and old paper wrapped around me like an old friend. I chose a small wooden table right by the window, overlooking the gentle flow of the river. 10 minutes later, the front door chimed softly. I looked up and saw Chloe walking in. She was wearing a simple denim jacket and a plain white blouse. She had lost weight. Her face looked tired, and dark circles still lingered under her eyes. But there was something profoundly different about her posture and her presence. The frantic defensive tension that used to define her every movement was entirely gone. She looked lighter. She looked like my daughter again, the woman she was before she let a con artist rewrite her soul and turn her against her own blood. She spotted me through the glass, paused for a fraction of a second, and then pushed open the door. There were no fake dramatic greetings, no forced smiles or awkward air kisses. She walked straight to my table, pulled out the chair, and sat down opposite me. For a long, silent moment, neither of us said a single word. We just leaned across the corner of the table and held each other. A long, tight, desperate embrace that carried 10 months of grief, survival, and quiet healing. When we finally pulled back, neither of us tried to wipe away the tears cutting paths down our cheeks. Chloe didn't order coffee right away. Instead, she unzipped her canvas tote bag, pulled out a thick envelope made of heavy cream-colored paper, and slid it gently across the wooden tabletop toward me. "I wrote this for you, Mom," Chloe said, her voice barely above a whisper, trembling slightly. 6 pages. I wrote it down because if I tried to say all of this out loud, my voice would break before I could even get past the first paragraph. I looked down at the envelope, then back up at my daughter's face. I slowly opened it and unfolded the lined pages. Her handwriting filled every inch, neat, deliberate, and painfully honest. As I read through the letter line by line, the entire history of our broken relationship unspooled under a completely new light. Chloe didn't offer a single excuse or try to shift the blame onto anyone else. On page 2, she confessed to the raw, ugly truth of her own weakness. She had chosen to believe Mason's toxic lies for years simply because she was too terrified to face the world and support herself on her own 2 feet. She admitted that she had grown so accustomed to taking everything for granted, the money, the safety nets, the endless bailouts, that she had completely forgotten what true gratitude looked like. And then, near the bottom of page 5, a specific sentence caught my breath and made my eyes burn with fresh tears. "I used to think you were controlling everything, Mom. I thought you were holding me back, building walls around me to keep me weak. But the terrifying truth is, I never realized how fiercely you were protecting me. I didn't think you were trying to suffocate me. I just couldn't see that you had built a fortress around my life, giving me a solid roof when the world was freezing, while I let a parasite tear it down from the inside." I looked up from the letter. Chloe was sitting across from me with both hands wrapped around a cup of untouched coffee, waiting. Not defending herself, not asking for money, not asking me to fix another problem, just waiting to hear whether her mother could still see her. I suddenly realized this was the first conversation we'd had in years that wasn't about money. I sat there in the quiet coffee shop, the river rushing softly against the banks outside, holding my daughter's handwritten confession in my hands. For 30 years, my entire life had been defined by numbers, ledgers, and logistics. I spent my corporate career believing that love could be measured, secured, and protected through financial safety nets. But sitting across from Chloe right now, watching her hands rest steadily on the table without trembling, I finally understood the greatest lesson of all. You cannot buy a person's maturity. You cannot engineer resilience with a bank account or insulate your children from the consequences of their own choices without destroying their capacity to grow. I set the letter down, reached across the table and took Chloe's hands in mine. Her fingers were warm and steady. I didn't offer her money. I didn't offer to buy her a new car, or clear her debts, or fix the wreckage of her past choices. Those days were gone forever, replaced by something infinitely more valuable. I looked straight into her eyes and gave her what she had truly needed all along: my absolute, unconditional respect for surviving her own mistakes and stepping out into the light on her own 2 feet for the very first time in her life. The river flowed past the window, carrying dead leaves away downstream. The past could never be rewritten. But as we sat there in the quiet Indiana morning, the future finally belonged to the truth. Life doesn't fix itself overnight, but healing, once it finally starts, moves with a steady and quiet grace. A few weeks after our meeting at the riverfront coffee shop, Chloe packed up what little she had left and moved into a modest 2-bedroom townhouse on the north side of town. It wasn't grand, but every piece of furniture inside it, from the worn oak kitchen table to the faded blue reading armchair, came from local thrift stores and garage sales. She spent her weekends sanding down old wood, painting nightstands, and building shelves with her own calloused hands. When she invited me over for Sunday dinner, she stood proudly in her simple apron, pointing out a slightly uneven bookshelf she had built entirely by herself, her eyes shining with a real, hard-earned sense of accomplishment that money could never buy. The large estate by Lake Geneva still remained safely locked within the Vance family trust. But it was Chloe herself who brought up the topic during one of our afternoon phone calls. "Mom," she said, her voice steady and clear, "please keep the lake house and the trust just as it is. Don't transfer it. Don't change the deeds. I want Lily to grow up understanding what genuine effort and stability look like. I want her to know that a roof over our heads is earned through honest work, not through entitlements or handouts." We handled the remaining assets with clean finality. The luxury car that Mason had driven was sold off, and we converted the proceeds into a secure college trust fund bearing the names of all 3 generations: Eleanor, Chloe, and Lily. It stood as a quiet symbol of a healed lineage, proving that our bond was no longer built on financial rescue missions, but on mutual respect. By the time autumn arrived, the heavy storms of the past felt like a distant memory. It was a crisp Saturday afternoon. I was standing out in the backyard of my home, kneeling on the soft grass. Lily was right beside me, her small hands dusted with dirt as she carefully scattered sunflower seeds for the sparrows. The back door clicked open. I looked up and saw Chloe stepping out onto the patio, carrying a tray with 2 glasses of freshly squeezed lemonade. She stopped for a moment, watching her daughter giggle as a flock of sparrows fluttered down to feed. A soft, radiant smile touched Chloe's lips, a smile completely free of the anxiety that used to haunt her. She walked over, handed me a glass of lemonade, and sat down on the grass right next to us. We didn't need grand apologies. The quiet rustle of the wind through the trees and the bright laughter of my granddaughter said everything that words ever could. "Grandma," Lily as the sparrows fluttered away, "can we come feed them again next Saturday?" I smiled. Of course. Sitting there on the green grass, the ledgers were closed, the accounts were balanced, and the boundaries were finally secure. True love is never measured by how willing you are to set yourself on fire just to keep someone else warm. True love requires the fierce, terrifying courage to draw a sacred boundary, giving the people you love the one thing they truly need to survive, the open space to finally stand tall on their own 2 feet.